Okay, wonderful. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for persisting through the day. Not in a negative way, but in a very positive. And I'm really delighted to chair this afternoon's panel. So this is the Fundee Showcase. They put the fun in funding. And we have today Adam Murray from an organization I know very well from Northern Ireland, Cara-Friend, and Dominic, Bilton, and Imogen, Holmes-Roe, Manchester's Whitworth Art Gallery. So I think we're going to start with Adam. I'll hand over to you. Just everybody, tray table, seat right, upright, phones on silent, the normal sort of thing, if you haven't done it already. So thanks very much, and let's kick it off.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen now, if that's okay then, yeah? Okay.
Yes, definitely, yes. It's not a maybe.
Can everybody see that? Yeah. Okay. Hi. Well, hello everybody. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to speak to you today. I really hoped to be with you, but just work conspired against me, and so I'm having to do this via Zoom. But hopefully we'll get through this pretty concisely, and hopefully it'll be of interest to you. Yes, my name's Adam Murray. I'm from Cara-Friend. Let me see. Can I manipulate the slides here? Okay. Yeah, so my name is Adam Murray. I am the Community Development Manager at an organization called Cara-Friend. We're based in Belfast, and we are an LGBTQIA+ charity which provides services to the community and campaigns across the entire region of Northern Ireland. My job is a bit of a Frankenstein's monster of a job. It involves event organizing like LGBTQIA+ Holocaust Memorial, Awareness Week. I'm a trustee of Belfast Pride. And I just do anything basically. If it's not training and education and it's not to do with young people, it gets thrown to me. So I'm not sure if everybody has heard of the charity that I work for, who are Cara-Friend. We were created in 1974 by young gay rights activists, as they were at the time, based out of Queen's University in Belfast. They would have been involved in groups like the Gay Lib Society up there at Queen's. And in 1974, they created Cara-Friend as a service delivery organization, a charity, less a political campaigning group, more supporting the community. It was set up initially just as a PO box. People could write to a letter befriending service. Over 1,000 of those letters that were sent in are thankfully preserved by the volunteers from the 70s onwards. And we are lucky to have over 1,000 letters between the 1974 and 95 currently preserved at what's called PRONI, the Public Records Office of Northern Ireland. So a very, very rich archive there. In 1976, they then established a helpline and befriending service, which continues to exist to this day. Originally, they were given use of a telephone by one of the lecturers at Queen's. They advertised it, and the day that they turned it on, it shorted the entire Queen's University switchboard. So with so many calls trying to come in, so they then had to move it and get their own dedicated line. As you can imagine, set up in the 70s, it fought alongside organizations like NIGRA, the Northern Ireland Gay Rights Association, for the decriminalization of homosexuality, as was termed then, which was achieved in 1982 following what was called Dudgeon versus the United Kingdom. And Jeff Dudgeon was one of the founders of Cara-Friend, and an active member of the Northern Ireland Gay Rights Association. We established a youth service in 1999. My first step along the journey with Cara-Friend was as a service user of that youth service, then was a volunteer, and eventually part-time, full-time, and now managerial role here with the charity. We deliver a range now of services. It's quite complex. We're a team of about 13 now, including a lot of training and education in schools, training school staff, training pupils, both as awareness training and anti-bullying training. We run a mental health and well-being support service. Our helpline continues to run. And my role is community development, as well as you can imagine, advocating for the needs of the community, engaging with politicians and local civic leaders. So what's our part then as part of this project? The QHCM partnership and work this enabled us to really engage with members of the community. We've been doing a lot of work over the past 5 years, exploring our heritage and our history, that's been really interesting for me. It's been new to my role, but we've worked with, for example, for the past 3 years now, not including COVID, we've teamed up with Ulster, or sorry, the Queen's University Belfast to have interns in public history do internships with us, and that's really allowed us to actually delve into that archive of our own letters. But with the QHCN, really, it's enabled us to look at materials that are in the Public Records Office that aren't just the Cara-Friend ones. The Northern Ireland Gay Rights Association has a really massive archive there, and QHCN is allowing us to start broadening out the scope of the history that we're able to explore, and the documents that we're starting to look at. Some of those documents include really interesting public newsletters and zines that were put together by activists in the 70s and onwards. Those included the Northern Ireland Gay Rights Association's own newsletter, Niagara News, and community zines like the Northern Gay and Upstart, which, as you can imagine, prior to the introduction of the internet, when really just a proto-community was starting to form in Belfast, these were how people got their information. These were how people discussed issues and put forward their views. And we'll look at some of those that QHCN is helping us to work with. We'll look at those during the course of this presentation, as well as those zines and newsletters. The volunteers were very meticulous in the way that they kept things. They actually cut articles out of the newspapers and preserved them, as well as old photographs. And we'll get to have a look at some of those things as well. And as we go forward, and I have to say a massive thank you to the QHCN team, who have been very supportive and have offered to work with Cara-Friend to try and identify further funding so we can continue this. And it's not a short-term thing. I think there's a lot of potential to expand what we're doing. Actually, there's a lot of material there to be mined, examined, and then used both as within our own community and for the broader public. The Cara-Friend archive itself, because I've started to build relationships with the Public Records Office through, we host hubs of Outing the Past, you might have heard of, the LGBT History Festival. The Public Records Office have said to me many times that our archive, the Cara-Friend archive, is one of the most popular archives in the entire Public Records Office. It's accessed every year by many academics and students. But the problem that we have found is that whilst it's one of the most popular archives, it's one of the least accessible because of the sensitive nature of a lot of the content that's in there. And so whenever it was donated to the Records Office, it was donated as a closed collection, which means that only someone who's specifically studying really LGBT history or heritage can get access to that. So we're working with them to make it more accessible because it is so very interesting and very popular. Anyone who's worked with archives will probably recognize something like this. It's not very interesting to look at, but it's very important. This is just a selection of some of what's in the Public Records Office here with the Northern Ireland Gay Rights Association's archive. And as you can see, a lot of it is stuff that would only be interesting to students of history and students of heritage. Meetings, notes, minutes, finances, correspondence, a lot of correspondence, as you can imagine. All communication was done in writing at the time, all official anyway. Research, reports, specific archives to the interaction between the community and the police at the time, the Royal Ulster Constabulary. And as you can see there as well, the Dutch stuff. So this is not visually very interesting, but this, I hope, is slightly more interesting. These are some of those copies of those Niagara newsletters, and we'll look a little bit at some of the examples of what do these contain. They're currently in the archive. Is it of interest to people now? Is there something that we can do with them? We certainly think so. So here's one example of it. If you can't see this on the screen, don't worry. We will zoom in on some of these so you can see them clearer. And certainly, I'm happy to circulate this afterwards. But you'll see there's a couple of other ones there. So you'll see the broad sort of topics that are being. What fascinates me about a lot of the newsletters is it's not just dry updates for the community. It's very vibrant. There are short stories in there. There's viewpoints. There's debate. There's an article I haven't got to read yet called Bye Bye Baby, which I really want to find out. But also in there, as you can imagine, annual general meeting minutes, letters that have been sent in, and lots of an assessment and analysis, as well as things like the Cara-Friend number changing. This was in 1977. You can see there's updates for the community that are in there. A lot of it also to do with like blasphemy, religion, and efforts to change the law. This obviously is pre-decriminalization. But we'll zoom in a little bit just so you can have it. So there's some of the things that I'm referencing there. Lots and lots of, this is all done by volunteers, remember, hand typed on a typewriter and then copied, bound and circulated from the 70s. So Gay News loses blasphemy case. I think that's probably a UK-wide issue there. There's also short stories, as I said, and press updates and things. This is an interesting one, I thought, because this is the announcement that they've had a meeting and they're agreeing to get a premises for the Gay Liberation Society. So this is 77. We are now in Belfast. Our Cara-Friend rents premises alongside other charities like the Rainbow Project, some of you may have heard of, and Here and I, which supports lesbian and bisexual women and their families. And only now in 2023 are we having serious conversations with Belfast City Council about the purchasing of a permanent LGBT centre. But you can see even in as far back as the 70s, the community were talking about spaces. How can we find our own spaces? How can we create community spaces? And Brian Gilmore is mentioned in that article. Brian was one of the founders of Cara-Friend and still active to this day. So they were using the students' building. As I say, most of them were students at Queen's. They were using the students' building. This is them now looking at branching out. And below there, even more gays. Unconfirmed reports that a local hotel has a very distinct gay atmosphere, which I think is their way of saying that might be a safe place to drink, you know, prior to decriminalizing. They can't say it's a gay-friendly bar or it's a gay bar, but, you know, you can see how they're trying to deal with that. So also, you know, Cara-Friend and Niagara, you know, very closely linked, often sharing offices and sharing resources. And this is 76. So this is the year that the Cara-Friend helpline, or the, as it was called, Cara-Friend Homosexual Information and Befriending. Again, all pre-decriminalization. This was their efforts to start that. And there's an interesting, I think it's in this one. I think it says somewhere that, yeah, it's at the bottom there. Most people will find it easier to pick up a telephone rather than to sit down and write a letter. But that's really interesting for us because, you know, that's in the 70s. Right now, we're finding that a lot of people, particularly younger people, more comfortable with online chats, more comfortable with emails, less comfortable with picking up the phone and speaking to a stranger. So it goes to show that it's a continually developing thing. Our helpline does continue to run, though. It's currently called Cara-Friend LGBTQIA+ Switchboard, runs 2 evenings a week on a free phone and anonymous line. We are in the process this year of revamping and redesigning that and relaunching it to make it a more modern service. So threads from the past right through to today. As well as keeping their own minutes, their own newsletters, the volunteers very meticulously, as I say, cut out newspaper articles and clippings and stuck them onto cardboard folders and then donated these also to the archive. We'll zoom in on some of these as well. Sorry if anyone maybe can't see them, but they're very interesting. You know, these are the community having their debates, talking about the law has to change and why the law has to change. Blackmail gays are easy prey. You know, and our community obviously very, when you look back at this time, very highly debated in the media, which is as true today as is possible. I'm literally just today, with 20 minutes notice, had to go on to BBC Radio Ulster to talk about, you know, can we debate respectfully with one another? And I had to sort of try and give them some home truths about, well, we're not actually going to debate trans people or non-binary people's right to exist. That's not up for debate. So the media, I'm not sure, we have to do a full analysis. I think there's a project in itself to assess the history of the media, but these will come in absolutely vital whenever we look at the history of how the media has reported on our community. Has it ever been held to account for the damage that it's often done with scandalous, titulating sort of tabloid press? And what's it doing now? And has anything really changed that much? We'll zoom in on just some of these items just in case they're of interest. So that's a great photo there of Northern Ireland Gay Rights Association volunteers protesting about RUC harassment of gay people at the time. And some of the posters are very of their time. RUC, whisper words of wisdom, let us be. Some of the others you'll have seen there were interesting. I presume everybody here will be at least vaguely to have a vague understanding of maybe who Dr. Reverend Ian Paisley was, a gentleman who created his own church, created his own political party, set up the campaign to save Ulster from sodomy, and basically the founder of the Democratic Unionist Party, the DUP. So that's I thought this was an interesting one. I can't tell if this is pro or anti Paisley, but it's certainly an interesting one. This one slightly more about his dour nature, keep gaiety out of Ulster. There's an interesting photograph that's not in these archives, but well, I'll talk about that in a little bit maybe actually. This is a poster that's preserved in the archives that we came across, depicting Paisley as the Ayatollah of Iran. And if anyone who can't see the piece of paper that he's holding, because he ran petitions, basically, he spoke in the Ulster Hall, which is a big music hall here, a big concert hall, and he launched a letter writing signature campaign to petition people to oppose decriminalization of being LGBT. The poster that he holds in his hand is "Save Ulster from blank, sign here or else," and the poster is "Gays now, you next." We also came across this one, which is a copy of the Ulster Paranoid, which I'd never heard of. It appears to be two dinosaurs morphed together, one called Church, one called State. They certainly were creative. We'll have to delve more deeply into some of these documents to figure out what the crack was with them. Just some more here. Obviously, we'll look at this one. So this is Paisley campaigns to save Ulster from sodomy. An opinion piece comes in saying "Save Ulster from Paisley," and there's an LGBT rights campaigner at the time. Paisley, there's a big LGBT student conference in Queen's University Students' Union. Paisley picketed it, and there's at least there's a very famous photo of a young man on the steps wearing a T-shirt that says "Save Sodomy from Ulster." So you can see these were the hot topics at this time in the 70s when these documents are. And then you can see within the articles the counterweight to Paisley's homophobic campaigning efforts to take the Dudgeon case to the ECHR to try and get a decision in Strasbourg to legalize. As I say, they're all very interesting. I'm sorry we don't have time to delve really into the nitty-gritty, but obviously that campaign was ultimately successful. The DUP was horrified by it, and in some ways, I think a lot of them still are. I think they have opposed every single right, every single vote that has come before Stormont, and effectively vetoed a lot of them. Every right that we have here was gained either from the European Court of Human Rights or Westminster, or imposed during Home-Rule or direct rule. Yes, so that's 1982. Just to tell you about where we're going. So obviously this is just something that we want to continue with. We would like to try and digitize more and more of these documents and get them. There is what's called the LGBTQI+ Heritage Project. We're setting up an online digital archive. So hopefully at some point in the future, all of these documents that were publicly available will be on that archive and accessible to any of yourselves or anyone else for that matter, with access to the internet. Symposium is a word that I had not come across very often until quite recently, and now I've heard it twice in a short space of time. We are actually, because we have done so much to look at our own heritage and history, which QHCN, the support of this project, has actually helped to do and broaden out. We're having our own symposium on the 16th of September at the Ulster Museum here in Belfast, and it's going to be a series of panel discussions. The first one's going to look at where is our history, what are the institutions holding our history, what are they doing with it? There'll be a session on and how are we as charities and community organizations exploring that history, and what are we using for it? We'll have a session that'll be looking at activists and educators in broader society, and we'll hopefully have some entertainment and others. So I'll get details of that sent to Dan and the team. You would all be absolutely very welcome, and would be free of charge, obviously. You'd all be very welcome. It's our 50th, as I said, we were set up in 1974. Next year is our 50th anniversary. We are working with funders and others to hopefully run a year of events and celebration, which you'll all be you'll get the details for, you'll all be very welcome. The biggest part of that is we're applying for a big amount of money to create an immersive exhibition through which someone would arrive into the exhibition starting in 1974 and then walk through the years to the present day, interacting with speakers who were there at the time, interacting with video and audio testimonies, and obviously other audiovisual elements. So that is a bit of a whistle-stop tour of where we're at. This project helps us in big ways to develop this, and we're very, very grateful for the support of everybody involved. So I think I'll shut up now. I think that's quite a lot to throw at you. I hope it wasn't too much. As I say, the slides can be disseminated if anybody wants to look at in more depth at any of those documents. Thanks.
So our second speaker, or speakers, I should say, today are Dominic Bilton and Imogen Holmes-Roe from the Manchester Whitworth Art Gallery.
Hello everyone, my name is Dominic Bilton and I'm a project producer at the Whitworth, and this is Imogen Holmes-Roe, who's the curator of historic fine art at the Whitworth as well, or as more commonly known, the Whitworth Art Gallery. So what we'd like to talk about is a project called Queering the Constituent Museum, and queering the Whitworth in general. I started at the Whitworth in 2018. I started in 2015, but I started a project called Queering the Whitworth in 2018 when I was on the front of house team at the gallery. The Whitworth, if you don't know, is part of the University of Manchester and has a collection of over 60,000 artworks that spans textiles, wallpapers, prints, and watercolours. And we don't have a permanent collection, but we have a changing collection that historically used to change perhaps every 3 months, but has since slowed down. But as such, it gave me a really great opportunity to be able to look at the collection, see the artworks because they changed so much, and start to think through how I could queer the collection. So until 2018, as far as I am aware, the Whitworth had no queer exhibitions as such, and didn't have any queer programming. So whilst I was on the visitor team, I decided to start to develop queer tours of the gallery, because over the 3 years that I had been on the gallery floor invigilating the spaces, I was very aware of some of the queer readings that I was giving the work, and I was certainly very aware of some of the artists that were queer. And unfortunately, I always relied on the same top 10 artists to always talk about. And so I went to the curators and I decided to ask them whether or not I could start to get works out of the stores. So I was doing my own research while I was invigilating the gallery floors as well. And I developed queer tours within the study centre, which you can see here. So this was on Valentine's Day in 2018. And we had 20 people that came out. I thought, oh, nobody's going to come out, it's Valentine's Day, but people did come out, and I managed to get some, I think I got like 15 artworks out of the stores. As I was doing my master's and thinking through my PhD project, we had a new director start with us. Sorry, got that off you. Because you may know, you may not know that Maria Bolshaw, who's head of Tate now, was at the Whitworth Art Gallery, and she left in 2017 to start her new position down here. We then had an art director called Alistair Hudson, who developed a museum module, a museum theory called the Constituent Museum, in tandem with Tanya Bagheera, the artist and the theorist, who developed the Useful Art Museum. And so I was thinking through my PhD and thinking through how I could use Alistair Hudson as this theorist, this really great theorist, the Constituent Museum as a participatory form of practice, for how I could start to diversify my own practice, my own tours, because I was sick and tired of seeing my same face on everything. It was just me that was doing this work. There wasn't anybody else doing this work. And I very much knew my own positionality. I'm a cis white man. I was sick of hearing my own voice. I think I'm much more butcher than I actually am. I name myself back. I know it's hard to believe, but I do. And I was like, I can't cope with this anymore. It's sending me west. So I was starting to think through how I could really diversify the queer voice within the gallery. And so the constituent museum practice, this theory, was key really to understanding how I could diversify the queerness within the gallery by bringing together other voices into the gallery. And what was interesting was that when Alistair Hudson, I keep on going up to move it, sorry. When Alistair Hudson started, we all sat down as a gallery and developed the Whitworth's new vision for the gallery. And at the centre of it is art and social change for people. So this useful museum, how can art be used for social change? So I was right, well, I'm using art for social change now. I'm putting the LGBTQ voice within the gallery. I'm doing something here. So I started to think through, I was like, okay, I'll start to talk to people some more and see what we can do. But as we got together as a gallery, through all the different departments, the whole gallery got together to think through the vision and to think through the new direction of the gallery. This was the vision that we came up with. Together we use art for positive social change. We aim to transform the way that art is experienced and used by using art as a tool to open up conversation, generate empathy, and actively address what matters most in people's lives here and now. What mattered most in my life here and now was the fact that this representation wasn't happening within the gallery at all. So I decided to make a change. So I went to different heads of different departments who gave me a chance to take this theory forward. And I was paired with Imogen, Holmes-Roe, because I was really interested in the historic and how we could trace ourselves through time. And the history has a great Renaissance print collection, stemming from the queer representation, same-sex desire from 1470 onwards, really within the collection. So I was really interested in this queer temporality and how I could see myself, my friends, my family, my lovers within history, and how I could use that to be able to give the people of Manchester that representation as well through history. So Imogen and I were paired together, which is a very useful museum way of working. The useful museum way of working is about interdepartmental working. It's about breaking down the walls between curators, engagement, visitor team. It's how we can use our practice to centre people and not departments within the gallery. So we put, when Imogen and I came together in 2020, just as lockdown was happening, Imogen and I came together to start to look at the collection of over 60,000 works. So it took us some time in between lockdown, and we went into the stores once a week, like on a Wednesday for once a week, for about 2 years, a year and a half. Yeah. And looked through cylinder boxes, looked through artworks on racks, looked through textiles, looked through wallpaper. In the new exhibition, some Spice Girls wallpaper that was definitely going up in the exhibition. Wallpaper was a really great example as well of some of the collections. So we came together, and one of the ideas that we had was to form a community group. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So I started at the Whitworth in 2019. So Alistair's vision was already well underway. I hadn't come from a gallery background. I actually worked at the National Coal Mining Museum, and I was their first curator of art and photography. So where I kind of got my grounding was actually in engaging with audiences. That was very much at the root of where my practice lay, because most visitors that were coming to the museum were unaware that there was even this heritage of art that was connected with the industry. So it was my job that how do I unlock those stories? And invariably I did that by working with the very communities that we served. So I'd always worked very closely with our own education team. And it was something that I was really passionate about. And so when I came to the Whitworth, it was very much about unlocking the historic art collection. As a university gallery, we have we wear many caps, but one of them is about, and something that I think is really important, how do we connect people with artworks that get dismissed and consigned to history? It's something that I think I want people to be able to look at these artworks and think that they can speak to us today as strongly as they did when they were created. So one of the first kind of acquisitions that I've made while I've been at the gallery was a series of Georgian prints, macaroni prints. So it was something I was really interested in, was questioning this idea of gender, sexuality, identity. How can we kind of have those conversations now and open those collections up? So, Dom and I had kind of spoken informally, and I think, after I'd done some of that early collecting, it was okay, there's a project here. And I think with the basis of Dom's PhD, I thought this is something that we could do that was just really fascinating. How can we know we've got this really rich resource? There must be more artworks in there that we can use. And that was what was really exciting. I was still very new to the gallery, and having that opportunity between those lockdowns when we weren't, it was a very, in some ways, quite privileged position because we weren't open to the public. It meant that we could really do that grounding of going back to the drawing board and getting boxes off the shelves and going through them. And both with very kind of different lenses. I'm a cis heterosexual woman. So for me, bringing that experience to it and having those very open conversations between us about what do I see, what does Dom see, is there some kind of commonality there? And the first kind of exhibition that I developed at the Whitworth, so we have a space upstairs which is part of what we call our constituent programming. So it sits alongside a space which is called our School of Creativity that Dom's team manage. And so that exhibition was called Still Parents, Life After Baby Loss. So that was, again, it was working with a group who'd experienced the loss of a baby either during pregnancy or shortly after birth. And what was really interesting in that project, in that myself and I again was partnered with my colleague Lucy Turner, who came up with the project. We both have lived experience of that subject. And so it was really interesting for us that it wasn't just the institutional voice that was being heard. We were creating alongside the group we were working with. We actually became constituents ourselves. And moving on to this project, Dom is bringing that, but then I am stepping into that institutional role again. So how do I navigate that? And I think what I've learned through both projects is it's about sitting back and listening. And I think going back to this morning's presentation, that's something that's really important, is it's knowing when the institution should have a strong presence, and it's knowing when to allow other voices to be heard and represented. So that's something that I've done throughout this project, is I've facilitated access to the collections, but I've stepped back and I've been very careful to listen to the voices and the conversations that have been taking place. We have enough time for questions.
We have to whisk through. We've got loads of slides. Yeah. So this is our constituent group in the School of Creativity, which the Civic Engagement and Education Department runs as part of the constituent programming on the mezzanine floor. So as you can see, it was really important that we get as much as bigger intersectional group as possible. People's different ages, sexes, sexualities, all those kind of things. And you can see us working here on a glossary of terms, which is something that we centered our community group on, is developing a queer glossary. So how can we apply queer language to artworks? And something that was really important to us, and something that's really important within constituent working, is that the institution should not do that work, but the community represent themselves. And that's what's at, and we've been working with this constituent group for a year now, and they're helping us develop that language. They're defining their own language to represent themselves within the institution, and not the institution doing that. But as constituent workers, The Whitworth is a facilitator, and I am as constituent as well as everybody else on that there. So this is one of our store sessions that we had during lockdown. But it wasn't during lockdown, after lockdown, sorry. Otherwise we wouldn't be there. And this is where we invited our constituent group to come in and have a look through the cylinder boxes and see what artworks that they were particularly drawn to. So what we were developing here was the exhibition Undefining Queer. Move on. Yes. So once again, knowing that I'm a cis white man, it was really important that we centered our programming and our thinking on people that weren't white or cis or male. Sarah Joy Ford, for example, we commissioned Sarah Joy Ford to make this banner for us. But Sarah Joy Ford, we also acquired one of her textile pieces. She's a textile artist. If you don't know her, she's amazing. Do look her up. She uses lesbian archives as a methodology within her quilt making. And we actually acquired one of Sarah Joy Ford's quilts for the Whitworth collection, a textile quilt, and she's the first openly out lesbian artist to use her sexuality within her work. This was the first queer piece of lesbian piece of art that we had within the collection. We started off in a test space in the collection care centre called Undefining, well, it was called Undefining Queer here as well. And this was a really important space because this highlighted some of the problematics that we hadn't thought of when we put this exhibition together. What slide have we got next? So this is just another section of it. So some of the works, we had 25 works that were in this space here, ranging from Renaissance prints up to contemporary work like Wolfgang Tillman, so you can see in the middle.
I think what was important about this space, as Dom said, was that it did allow us to kind of see what the initial response was going to be. It's something that we were really grateful to have Richard come to talk to us when the space was open, because it highlighted things we hadn't thought we might encounter. For example, we were left anti-trans propaganda in the space. It allowed us to actually bring in external trainers to kind of talk to particularly our front of house staff on how we should handle this when it's left throughout the space, what our response should be to it. We also we have a code of conduct within the gallery, so we took elements of that and actually made it very visible within the space. So we talked about the fact that we don't tolerate exclusionary or discriminatory language within the gallery. And that was a kind of a way of kind of protecting visitors, as well as our constituents and ourselves.
So this was a film called Incoming Transmissions. It is online. It's by the Proud Trust, which is an organisation in Manchester. They support LGBT youth from 12 to 24, and 6 non-binary and trans young people came together to make this film, and we had this on display, and we will have it on display for Trans Day Visibility as well within the gallery, but we had it on display within the Collection Care Centre, and a lot of the material that was being left by TERFs was in relation to this. And what was really important for us was that these young people were down the road 500 meters away, and so we were really conscious that this stuff that was being left in this space, they could quite easily come and see, this film and see themselves in the film, and this material's being left. So what was super great is that the institution started to search the space every half an hour the material that was being left, and we'd spoken with other colleagues from across the country. I reached out to lots of people, Richard and John, etc., and Charlotte from the Walker, and it was great because I think what's interesting in listening to other practitioners as well today is that we're all facing the same kind of thing, and I think the learning for me today is it's just cemented that we as institutions, as cultural institutions, are the ones that can help each other, because other outside organisations, I don't think, have that knowledge to be able to do that. So the LGBT Foundation, who we partnered with, didn't know how to help us. And so when I reached out, it was actually the cultural institutions that were helping us. So I think that's a really important thing for me to take away from today as well, listening to other people's experiences. So the test space developed into Undefining Queer, and this is Sarah Joy Ford's quilt there, look, with the lesbian archive in the middle, and it says Dyke. So Karen Fish, who's Frankie Sinatra, she does a day at every Sunday, I think once a month, at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern, a drag king night. But you can see some of the wallpaper and some of the prints and some of the photographs, and and some sculpture from from our collection. Yeah.
So we, working with our group, looking at going through the collections, it helped us identify 5 prominent themes for us to do with the exhibition. So we looked at mythology, which was a great opportunity to kind of highlight the historic works within the collection. We looked at activism, which that section is here. As we move on, we have queer gaze, and we have gender acts, and also chosen family. And I think what was interesting from the test space is that enabled us to think about what our stance and our role was and our position as a gallery and an institution in doing this work. So as we were kind of developing the look of the exhibition and the themes themselves, it was our moment to kind of have activism. So with the kind of trans material that was left, we very deliberately decided to use the colours of the trans flag within the space. It's not something that everybody will notice, but it's something that was quite important for us to be able to include. Because we're aware this is kind of the first stage in this work for us. We know we've got a huge amount of work to do, a huge amount of collecting that needs to be done. We have very obvious gaps in our collection. So, and works by trans artists is one area. We loaned a work from a contemporary Manchester artist for the exhibition, but it's not something that we have in our permanent collection. So this was an opportunity for us to do some of that. Chosen family, bizarrely, was a theme that got some negative kind of
trolled online.
Yes, trolled online. And so we very deliberately included that within the main exhibition as part of our stance. Yeah. So this is the kind of chosen family wall. So part of the works that we show, it isn't full of works by artists who themselves might self-identify. It's because obviously we understand the problematics. This is what the project is about, problematics of language and problematics of that. So it's actually about kind of addressing, allyship as well. It's about looking at, okay, with the Spice Girls wallpaper when people are growing up, those were kind of people's chosen families. It's about showing how inclusive whole community is. So that was something that was very important to us. And also giving presence to the voices of our constituents. So throughout the exhibition, you will see this interpretation, and this is where our group chose works themselves and did the main interpretation for them. So again, it's us as the institution stepping back and putting the spotlight very much on their voices. So I won't include this. We have got some audio.
Which is what this funding is going to do for us, isn't it?
Yeah, so people can also listen to our constituents themselves, actually narrating their own descriptions of the artworks, which is lovely. The opening night, it was our second highest attending opening in the gallery for
only beaten by Andy Warhol. So I'll take that. We had nearly 1,000 people come through the doors between 5 and 8. Only beat by Andy Warhol, and Andy Warhol, obviously. So this is part of like working with constituents and working with community groups, is that they're the ones that we had no budget for marketing. We had nothing like that. Andy Warhol had a lot of budget for marketing. We have no budget for marketing. We worked with community groups and social media, and this is the attendance that came out. But it also shows the need in Manchester, of all places, for queer exhibition making. Yes, and this is a lovely card that we. So this was in the test space downstairs, but I can't see because thing is on it. But this is a beautiful message in support of incoming transmissions, and it just didn't matter how much negativity we got within that space. Trans lives are up for debate, and this it didn't matter how much negativity we got. If that was the one positive comment card, then it was certainly worth it. But this is part of the glossary as well, and this is what the funding from from the Queer Heritage is going to do. So we have comment cards in the exhibition space, and Dylan 14 has drawn these lovely women for us and comments, and we have comment cards from people that are aged 5, aged 10, and we got the picture of so we have hundreds and hundreds of comment cards that are helping us build up this glossary of terms from the community. Yeah, I didn't know about this. Yeah. Did you? Yeah. Sometimes it's just like in English. Yeah. Yeah. So these are some of the beautiful comments that we've been receiving. We have, of course, received some negative comments, but these are hundreds and hundreds of comment cards, and these 4 are the nasty comments that we've received in the space. So it just, love wins, doesn't it? Really does. And so so this is a real archive of community feedback, of community helping with the glossary as well. And so this is going forward, how we're going to build this glossary in the gallery, and then how we can develop that as a search system so people can actually put in gay, because at the minute in our search systems at the Whitworth, you cannot put in gay or lesbian or trans or bi, and nothing comes up. It's very normative. So this is the next stage of the project, how we can queer the collection search system.
So, do we have any questions? I think it's just so people online,
Thank you so much. It's maybe more a question for the both of you, but yeah, maybe for everyone, I don't know. But something that came through when you were talking about community engagement for me is maybe a tension between the power differential that can come up between like the both of you who get paid for this and the community that you're bringing in. And I think you've productively identified your positionalities, but it does, like it is the case that it's mostly white and cis people who end up in these positions where they get paid for this stuff. And is there anything like in the work with the community, like, did you pay your constituents? Is there any way that like, how do you try and like engage with that like power differential in your work?
It's something that we've talked about quite a lot actually with the work that we do. We, when we work with our constituents, we always employ a practitioner, an artist practitioner. So it's an art session that we come together to do an art session with a practitioner, and so that's how we think that we wouldn't be able to afford to do this work without. We wouldn't be able to afford to pay 20 participants to come every month. There just is no way of doing it. So in our heads, our justification was that, okay, so if we get a practitioner to come in an art session, an art practitioner to come in and lead creative sessions with people, so they get something out of it. So we provide all the material, everything else like that, and they just need to come and help us with the language. That's how we, in our heads, how we thought that might work quite well, and how we might be able to give something back to them, and then they can take something from us as well. And obviously they're helping us develop this language as well.
And I think they were very aware and very open. We were all very open about that exchange that took place. And I think for a lot of the group, particularly as it was developed and the session started February, was it January, February last year? So it was still as we'd just fully come out of lockdown. And a lot of people just wanted, we had people who just recently moved to Manchester and just saw it as a great opportunity to just meet new people. So I think it wasn't kind of like labour, it was this wonderful kind of meeting people, a real social aspect to it. And the group, even though the exhibition's up, the group are really keen to continue. And so that's something that we're looking at, is how can we do that? And that's great that we've had this funding, because it enables us to put more sessions on that allow us to continue working with them in that way. But we do there are other projects that happen at the gallery where we work with groups in a very different kind of model. But yes, there is kind of a sort of financial remuneration that will be built into those.
And hopefully funding allowing, we can, like, for example, we give them everything that we can. So we made lots of merchandise and we bought them all, like, lots of things. And yeah, in an ideal world, that would be brilliant. But yeah, that is you know, this utopian idea of constituent practice. That's where it is. It's a utopian idea. But as an institution, are financially struggling within the current climate, it's difficult to have the representation and then afford to have that representation. Do you know what I mean? It's really tough. But we do only employ, well, I only work with LGBT practitioners because I'm queer, so I would, do you know what I mean? So we do, like, the practitioners that we work with are from the community, and we do pay them, you know, to come in and work with the group, and we provide all the materials and things like that. So we do as best as what we can within, you know, within the premise that we've got financially, and yeah. Yes.
Hi, Sue Shave, Acting Director of the Jewish Museum London. I was very struck when you were talking about including the feedback, the negative feedback that you'd got actually as part of an ongoing contribution. And I just wondered if you could just talk a little bit more about, you know, good examples of how you've made that work. And I remember doing an event at Chiltern Open Air Museum, and we got some negative feedback from a local vicar who wanted to, you know, put whole articles in the newspaper, which he did. But it all backfired on him, because what actually happened was the Chiltern Open Air Museum got to say all over again how proud we were to be welcoming the communities like our LGBTQ community who were underrepresented and discriminated against. And we got a second huge double-page spread, but it's quite, you know, and in the Jewish Museum, obviously, we also find that we get quite a lot of anti-Semitism that comes through on our social media and all sorts of ways. And again, it's about safety. You're worried about the safety of your staff. You're worried about the safety of your visitors. Just, and I'm sure you must have felt that at times, particularly if, you know, the sort of strength of feeling. Just maybe just talk a little bit about how you turn that around.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're aware that we have had, I mean, you know, we were talking with Richard just briefly before about, you know, we had a kind of Dom had to experience a verbal encounter in the gallery space, and we talked about what that led to, and it wasn't really giving currency to what was being said by that individual. Because, you know, I won't go into any details, but it didn't require it. But what it did do was it enabled us to look again at what our policies and procedures were, and tightening those up and making sure that staff aren't left vulnerable or exposed in those positions. And I think that's what's really good. With the negative feedback, written feedback that we have, we don't get rid of that. What we do is we don't leave it on display, sorry, the people to have to see it, because we don't want to expose people, because that's our stance, is not to have that. But we keep it because we think it's a really important document related to the project. And something that you know, Dom encountered recently that was really interesting was somebody did leave some what you would call constructive feedback within the space. But then for the first time that, you know, since I've been at the gallery, somebody had then written on the same card a counter argument, and then somebody had written something, and it was really interesting, but it was all done with love. That's what we found really amusing, was it was always signed off with kisses, and, you know, things like that. So, you know, we thought that was really interesting, that people had taken the time to read other feedback and then felt strongly enough to go, no, I'm not going to just passively read that and go, I'm going to respond to it. So yeah, I think we're learning all the time, but I think we're still learning, and I think there's a lot more that we need to do and we can do, and it's only when these things crop up, unfortunately, that you can't preempt everything. But it's, you know, it's great to be at the start of this process.
Any other questions?
Maybe just one for Adam, just while you're still on the line. I just wanted to get some advice from Adam to how you deal with it as well in Northern Ireland, in terms of just negative feedback as well, and your advice on dealing with it.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, every year or so we would get homophobic and transphobic tracts posted to us from some group in America. And maybe we should keep those. We don't. Maybe those have a place in the archive as well. Pretty much, I think that the approach that's just been described is probably the correct approach, that you don't further expose people to negative feedback and criticism, but that you do document and record it. And this was very much like, this was the radio discussion that I did earlier today on BBC Radio Ulster, was, you know, it's because there's an event tomorrow that's all about how do we respectfully agree to disagree and have these debates. Yeah, it's something that I suppose I'm wrestling with myself. But yeah, I think the way that's been described is probably the correct way. Just respectfully, not give a platform to people who want to use hateful or intolerant language, but to try and document it, because it does exist and it has to be remembered that it exists. Here, I would say, in my own personal experience, it's a weird thing that, I mean, sometimes when people try and, as has just been sort of said, sometimes when people try to put out negativity, they actually just do themselves a disservice, and then it comes back on them. I did a radio interview many years ago with a minister, and I gave my opening spiel. It was in support of marriage equality. And when the radio presented, and I don't like going on, but it's like I'm the queer person and they're the religious person. I don't like that, but whenever the minister was given his opportunity to speak, he began his contribution with, well, I think what most normal people would agree with is, and then just instantly had to, you know, he saw my face, he saw the presenter's face, and was very flustered for the rest of the interview. So sometimes, you know, it blows back in their face, because at the end of the day, what underpins a lot of this stuff is just negativity, prejudice, ignorance, bigotry. And I think that, at least on certain aspects, people can see that for what it is now. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people can't see that for what it is when it comes to trans, non-binary, gender diverse identities. That's like that acceptable prejudice that's open for discussion. But we just have to overcome that in the way that we're continually trying to overcome other prejudices. It is a process, and it's a difficult one.
I've got one last question, and it's more for Adam, because I think one of the things that's been interesting for me about this panel is that we have a conventional museum institution that's focused on the culture sector and part of the culture sector. And Adam, Cara-Friend is really about a community support organization that's kind of wandered into you know, the culture, moving into that culture area, working in heritage in that way. And I wondered whether, from your perspective, what were some of the things that were particularly interesting to you, or surprising, or unconventional, or whatever, seeing kind of what we all do in the heritage and culture sector from the outside. And obviously you haven't run away from that, so that's really good. But also, you know, the way those partnerships work, we have a certain sense of how they work, but we're coming at them from a place where we actually don't have that much to lose. Whereas from your perspective, from this perspective of community support organizations, you're really on the front line in a way that we're not. You're trained in these areas in the way that we're not. We're not social workers. We don't have that expert training. So I just wondered if you had some insights to share with us from that. I think would be really interesting and valuable.
Just as you said there, most of my colleagues are very much like frontline sort of staff. You know, they're delivering youth services, they're delivering training and education services. They're very specific on the area that they do. We're very lucky in that we have a funded community development post. That post is funded by our local city council, who have capacity money that they can give to organizations. And that has really freed up, you know, my role to explore some of these things. It has been very much a journey, you know, it's sort of pieced together year on year. With the local university, I didn't know, you know, until a few years ago that they have a public history master's that runs every year. And as part of that master's, young people who are doing the course are asked to do a 30-day internship. And the university was the one that approached us and said, would you like to come up and pitch to the students if they'd like to do their internship with Cara-Friend? And at the time I thought, what on earth would they find of interest or of use here? You know, none of them are going to have anything to do. But I said yes to it. And we figured out, you know, well, there's an archive over in the records office. Could we get you access to the archive? So the first batch of students, I had 3 come on. They went to the archive, which is great that the material's there, but it was a bit of a mess, just boxes upon boxes. So the first set of students, they came in and chronologically sort of tidied it up. The second set of students last year, they went in and indexed every item. So everything was given a number. They worked with the records office, gave them great experience in that and archiving. So everything became it. So I have a spreadsheet now that says all the stuff in the Cara-Friend archive. Here's the number. And we captured any demographic data that was mentioned, particularly in the letters, obviously, you know, a place name, a sexual orientation that's mentioned, a gender identity, any age, all of that was captured. And then any thematic data that was in the documents was also then indexed out. So anything that they ask for or anything they identify as an issue they're dealing with. And so we now have that. So my most recent student is now going through and identifying the letters that tell stories that are of interest. And we're also continuously assessing the ethics of how do we ethically use this material. Is anyone identifiable from it? Is there a way to tell these stories without directly using the material itself? So just over the years, I've built up relationships with the universities here, the Public Records Office, the museums, and a lot of these institutions are having these internal conversations. What are we doing on equality? You know, we're not governed here by the Equality Act. We're governed here by what's called Section 75, that not only says that institutions can't discriminate, but they must actively seek to promote equality. And so a lot of these institutions I have found are very eager actually to work with the community sector to be part of a conversation and to look at how they can use their materials more effectively for that reason. So you have to have a bit of capacity to do that. As I say, we're lucky that we have a staff member that I can put some of my time into that. But I would say that it all starts with a conversation. It all starts with a cup of coffee and I'm looking around saying like, do you have any interest in this? Do you have any scope for this? Yeah, it's certainly a journey. We're actually, as part of the work that we're doing this year, we're hoping that by the end of this year, we'll be able to put together with colleagues a guide to if you're just a queer person or a queer community group in your city and you don't know there's much heritage work going on, how do you start? Who do you go to? So hopefully that will be something that'll be available later this year. It's a good question.
Thank you. Well, thanks everyone. And I think we're on to the next panel. So thank you, our speakers.